All right. This one is a little bit different to some of the conversations that I've been having recently because I'm joined today by my brother, Tom. And many folks will have come across Tom around the industry, and we've even worked together many years ago. A lot of the crossover and things has led many people to actually not even be able to tell us apart sometimes. I think when you put
Especially on
this
Twitter.
together, it's not that hard, but we definitely get tagged in each other's conversations. We definitely get mixed up a little bit. So you might know Tom from his work relatively recently on SEOMBA.com is probably where he's been most high profile and visible around the industry. But I'm sure when you've heard us talk for a little bit, you'll be more confused in some ways because, we sound the same to many people. But at least you'll have got to know us better and be able to tell us a bit more apart. So thank you for joining me, Tom. Let's see how much we stay on topic and talk
Yeah,
industry
thanks for having me.
just catch up.
It's going to be exciting.
It's like the same setup as when we're just catching up. So we'll see if we produce something suitable for public consumption. I thought a good place to start is your recent piece you entitled "Google is grounded and needs to learn how to soar," which is you putting together from the outside of Google you're pitching, and I agree, is potentially a better way of thinking about how to integrate AI mode and the kind of the evolution of AI overviews into regular search than they're currently doing. So before we get into why it might be better or why they can't do better, if you want to start just by describing what it is and the kind of philosophy behind it.
Yeah, sure. So I got access to AI mode when it first came out, 2 weeks ago or whatever. And I was playing around with it, and what quickly became apparent to me was the AI mode will just answer any question you give it. So, in classical Google sense, you can say, how tall is the Eiffel Tower? It'll tell you, right? But then you could also say things like, I want a pesto recipe, and it'll just give you a pesto recipe. You can say, what was the score of the Nets game last night? And it'll just tell you all about the Nets game. And it has these kind of like funny little links off to the right-hand side. And it has some of these kind of like citation links that you've seen with like the world's literal smallest anchor link, like little chain.
The only thing smaller than that is the ad.
Yeah, exactly.
Designation.
Yeah.
On regular search.
And so I looked at AI mode and I was like, this really sucks. And I think it sucks for the open web, but I actually think it sucks as a user, right? I don't really want an AI generated recipe. Right? Like I want like a real recipe. There's obviously some nuance in there, but I started playing around and I realized that using Gemini, which is obviously the kind of model that's underpinning all of Google stuff, using Gemini, you can write your own system prompts, what they call gems. And I was playing around with that and I realized that if you basically prompt Gemini to say, okay, give me what I need as a kind of a quick answer to whatever I've asked. And then give me a set of links from the web, but don't just give me links. Sell each link to me, right? Basically, like a used car salesman, like literally, like tell me
sell me this pen.
But yeah, like the best possible version of why I should click on this link, and make each of the links distinct and useful and different from each other, and so on. And so to go back to that kind of pesto recipe example, instead of just giving you a pesto recipe using the system prompt that I wrote, it now says, okay, here's a really basic, easy pesto recipe. You want the basics? Go here. Here's one that uses, pine nuts. Here's one that talks about the different variations of pesto recipes that you could explore, and so on. And to my eyes, now there's obviously some debate, right? And I think recipes in particular is a little bit of an interesting topic for a lot of folks, which we can maybe get into later. But this idea of like, I think it's a better experience. Like I would rather have the AI be immediately useful and then send me exactly where I need to go, right, than answering the query. Now it's a spectrum, right? Because again, how tall is the Eiffel Tower? The AI should just answer that, right? Like, feature snippets have been answering that for a long time.
Yeah, we don't need AI to answer that.
First of all, we don't need AI to
regular
answer that.
Information retrieval.
Right, but also, fine, just tell me the answer. And I think the future that I'm pointing at is one that, to my eyes, seems both kind of better for the web, but also like better for Google to put ads in. Like if there are still links in the response, like it's very obvious how one of those links would have a little ad label and be like, by the way, if you wanted to buy this cute little blender that's perfect for making pesto, like here you go. And so that was kind of the genesis of it. Now, the title of the piece, Google is Grounded, refers specifically to what I think is actually going on here, which is kind of interesting, is that there's this technique called grounding, right? Which basically says when an LLM generates a response to a query, it generates a response, and then it grounds that response in facts, right? It basically grounds that response in a bunch of web pages, right, that it's retrieved relevant to the query. And all of the academic papers about grounding, the UX in those papers is citations, right? It's like, okay, here's a fact, and then it's like there's a little citation for that fact, and that citation leads to a web page, right? That's kind of the technical mechanic of how grounding works. And then you look at what Google's shipping in AI mode, and you're like, you're shipping the UX from a like an academic paper. Yeah, like the technical grounding has happened, it has occurred, and you have cited each relevant fact and claim within the response, but that isn't actually a user experience, right? What's interesting here is I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and it was remarkable to me speaking to a bunch of folks who work on Google search inside Google, who didn't have access to AI mode, and I was like, oh right, this is just like an entire other part of the business. Like this is a whole other wing of Google. Like, yeah.
This is one of the things that I think is really interesting for us to have this conversation. Is the other piece of your background, of course, is that you worked at Google for a little while. I think it's probably fair to say in one of those other wings.
Yeah, of Google. Yeah, a very small wing. Yeah. True.
But like, you have experience of how Google does produce things that are unknowable, separate from like the rest of it, in particular the money making bit, and quite often the strategy bit.
Totally. Yeah. When I was there,
it's quite interesting.
When I was there back in like 2012, 2014, that was Android, right? Android was this like entirely kind of other vehicle inside Google that was entirely disconnected from all kinds of other things, caused all kinds of strategic problems and personnel problems and so on and so forth. But I think that is literally happening right now. It's like you have an AI team that it makes AI overviews and AI mode, and you have a search team that does, for want of a better term, 10 blue links, right? And they'll do a bit more than that. And I don't mean to be harsh to them, but they do all of other Google, all other Google search. And I think that those teams are honestly probably just not talking to each other very much.
It's a fascinating organizational dynamic. We can come back to lots of little bits, but one thing just to drop in, I mentioned to you recently the episode of the Dwarkesh podcast where he was talking to Jeff Dean and his colleague, whose name continues to escape me and I should really look up and learn. But it's a fascinating conversation. One of the things they talked about, I think it was they said it was one of their realizations was that they had to centralize the AI work. So this has nothing to do with the organizational dynamics with search, but just, previously, remember they had the DeepMind and Brain.
Yep.
And there's like business leadership in one place and technical leadership somewhere else, and all these different kind of things going on. And they realized that just purely the dynamics of compute requirements meant that they couldn't do this thing of like, well, everybody can have a little bit, right? Like everybody has a little bit of compute, and let's hope that this works out great. And they actually had to place some bets, and they had to say, no, we're going to pool our compute into massive chunks and place much more strategic bets on those things. And so my understanding is they've done that, right? That they've put it under Demis's leadership, and I guess I'm assuming Jeff Dean's technical kind of direction, but it's one thing. But I guess it's probably still separate to the money making bits and like you can't imagine anybody like where's ad strategy in this.
Right. In some ways, rightfully non-existent, right? Like I think that the entire fight right now is for the user behavior, right? Like if you get consumers to search, you can figure out monetization. Or to say another way, if people stop searching on Google, like everything else,
it's much more the negative way
around. That's the whole game.
Somebody asked Sam Altman the other day, would you rather have, how did they phrase it? Like, would you rather have a billion people using your thing, or some way of phrasing basically the more cutting edge model? Right. And interestingly, he said the billion people, which is where Google is. I mean, arguably right now they have both, right? I think latest Gemini is actually really good.
Yeah, for sure. Gemini 2.5 is astonishing. It's basically replaced my ChatGPT usage. I
actually literally just downgraded my ChatGPT, and I'm going to no doubt sign up to pay for something else, or I keep moving around and trying out the different ones. But yeah, currently, right as of right this second, paying for Gemini through Workspace and not paying for ChatGPT.
So I think the interesting thing to kind of like play my article out a little further, because it was very kind of like here and now, right? I think the interesting thing, and you challenged me on this in chat the other day, the core belief I have here is that search queries are going to explode, right? So this is Jevon's paradox in full. Do you know what Jevon's paradox is?
I do, but for the audience.
Okay. Well, for the audience, it basically says like you make a process or a resource more efficient, and ironically, usage goes up. Right? You would think if it becomes more efficient, then you need to do it less, right? Because it's more efficient. But the irony is that you make it more efficient, and people find far more ways to use it because it's easier to use. And so, to put that into concrete terms for search, the number of search queries, right? Which obviously, like how we define a search query is kind of changing. Broadly defined, the number of search queries is massively exploding. Right? I mean, you can see this just from your own ChatGPT or Gemini usage, right? It's like no longer do you have to like ask
even
how
probably
tall
in core Google, actually.
I mean, both, yes. I mean, even in core Google, but I think specifically with all of the LLM stuff, right? Is you can now ask such a broader range of more diverse and more intricate and more abstract questions than you ever could before. And one of the simplest kind of analogies I have for this is you can now ask emotional questions, not just informational questions, right? You can say, how do I deal with my 9-year-old who's doing X, Y, and Z? Or how do I prepare for this big meeting that I'm having? Like just the kind of questions that you would never have like typed into Google, right? Previously. And so on the one hand, the number of queries we have is absolutely going to explode. It is already exploding, I think, right? At the same time, I believe that the number of links out is going to dramatically decrease, and the ratio of paid links to organic links is going to flip in favor of paid links. Right? So you could wrap all of this up by saying that I think the future is not 10 blue links, but it's 3 green links. And what I mean by that is like the links are going to be different. They're going to feel differently because they're going to be sold to you differently. They're going to appear differently and so on. But there's going to be a smaller number of them, right? We're not going to be in such a, hey, you could click any of these results. Instead, it's going to be like, you probably wanted these 3 things. And there's going to be an ad or 5 alongside them, right? So like the ratio is going to shift in favor of paid. Obviously, the quality is going to be much higher, right? I think search is going to get better all in terms of kind of end user experience. Like whatever you're searching for, it will be able to help you out in more creative ways and more interesting ways. And so like the number of queries goes up, the number of links goes down, and it's basically anyone's guess whether the web survives. Impact. Right? Like I think that's basically the game that's kind of left here is like, is there still a kind of viable ecosystem in the middle of that or not?
Well, I mean, if there's not, then it doesn't last very long. Because
I mean, maybe
it needs to. Well, let's come back to that. There's so many threads we could go down here. So the one that I felt fairly strongly that I had the opposite intuition about the ratio of the links. So I was feeling that part of what made paid search work was that it was such a low proportion of all links out from Google. And going all the way back to the we'll never put ads in search kind of purity of whenever that was, 1999,
whatever,
even before that, I think. And so because there's a couple of magical things going on, right? One of the reasons that search ads has been so much more powerful, even than the behemoth of the Facebook ads and whatever else, is that you're literally asking for the thing. You're like, please, can I give you my credit card details? Right. Because I want this thing. And I felt like a second part of the magic was 2% of the things you click on are paid. And I've been just challenging that thinking recently, actually partly again through the analogy of the social media platforms, where Facebook in particular has pretty much, I think, made it so that there's only paid clicks out of the platform. Right, and that is continuing to work. It seems. And what is it?
I mean, for some definition of working, when you factor in the economy and free speech, and I mean, it works for their business. It works for Facebook, yes, for sure. Like Meta as a business, it works for, but there are some externalities that are questionable.
Understand. There are some externalities. That is true, and probably fewer externalities in paid search when you're thinking kind of hyper commercial stuff. If somebody's searching to buy a thing and you're advertising the thing they want to buy, I think the challenge is much more the less commercial queries, right? If you kill the uncommercial query, then, as you say, the open web withers and dies very quickly. And I think you do need the freshness of it. You can't just skate by on yesteryear's open web.
Right.
I don't know what proportion of all queries are timely, but I suspect it's quite high. And I think that's actually a lot of people have often misunderstood what is it? What is the stat? 15%, 25%. I see different numbers of all queries are new, right? Some of that is long tail creativity. An awful lot of that, I think, is just novelty. It's like a thing happened today that had never happened before, and people are searching for that thing in some form or another. So you use that as a proxy, and you're getting a quarter of your users are dissatisfied with the experience if you can't show them new open web content or new content that you're only going to get from the open web.
I think I will be, unashamedly an advocate for the open web, right? Like I've been that way for a long time, and certainly I currently work at Raptive, where we're very much kind of like standing up for the open web. I think part of what gets lost in the conversation is like, I don't think search is a pure information efficiency game, right? And I think Google sometimes treats it that way. And
it's right there in the mission.
It's right there in the mission, pretty much. It's like, it isn't just about saying, hey, I search for this thing about, I don't know, let's say like a graphic novel coming out. Search for a graphic novel coming out. Google could just tell you about the graphic novels coming out. But in disintermediating the chance for somebody to go to a publisher, a blogger, an independent creator, some small independent news source, you also lose the chance for them to like join their email list or like follow them on social, or like there's a lot of other kind of like, kind of secondary ecosystem things that happen when you actually go out off platform, right? If you only stay on Google, right, then you don't get a chance to do all these other things, right? And I think actually a lot of those things are things that people really want. People love following creators. They love consuming entertainment content.
News thread where everybody's like, no, I just want the efficient thing that I say I want. Don't show me any of this commercial nonsense. But of course, people want to buy things. Trade happens for a reason. Commerce is positive for everyone, right? I bought the thing because I wanted the thing more than I wanted the money. You wanted the money more than you want. They're like, we don't need to do capitalism 101. But I think I very much agree with all that. And actually, I think it extends. It's easy to think of it in terms of the indies, and they're probably the ones who will bear the brunt of the bad cases quickest. But actually, I think it applies to major media and also a lot of commercial platforms as well. People, do actually want to go on the mailing list of the retailer that's going to tell them when the next thing they want is going to come out. Right? These people are not coerced into all of these transactions, and I think that's kind of an interesting one. One of the things going back to the AI mode prototype that you made, one of the things I really liked about it was the fact that it was coming up with the different variations of the thing you might want based off your simple search query. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to the ballooning search volume argument is, so I think in your post you had the tomato soup example, right? And I think that's a classic example where you can imagine wanting the bland, average, median, like give me the median tomato soup recipe, and that's fine in certain situations.
Which is basically what the LLM is giving you, right? It's like we have averaged the tomato soups.
and it's possibly not. Yeah, it might even be hallucinating. It can't taste soup, so it could well have come up with a bad average.
For sure,
you have no idea. Serves a certain purpose. But what I liked about the "sell me this tomato soup" link is that it sells you very, very different tomato soup examples. Here's spicy, here's vegan, here's whatever. And I actually think that is a big part of the future of search in the broadest sense. Yep. And one of the things that I turn to on this is two experiences that I remember very vividly. One was there was a lot of talk when social media was on its like breakout hypergrowth moment, right? 2008, let's say, that it was going to kill search. People were not going to search for the best local restaurant. They were going to ask their friends on social media and get a recommendation instead. Of course, what happened was they did both, right? You get the explosive growth of both things. It didn't slow down search in the slightest. But also around that time, maybe a little after, I remember I gave a present. It must have been a little after because it was at a Search Love. I gave a presentation where I laughed at the idea of doing a search like breakfast.
Right.
Right. And I was like, come on, like, what does that even mean?
Yep.
You can't just type breakfast into a search engine and expect to come up with anything helpful. And it was a few years later at another Search Love. I was in an American city that I didn't know. I woke up. I was hungry. I searched breakfast and got exactly what I wanted, right? Recommendations of breakfast places
Life
near
comes
where I
at you
was
fast.
at that moment.
Yeah.
And but what's interesting about regular search, that in information retrieval sense, is that they've got pretty good at disambiguating that.
Mm-hmm.
So for a start, they're going to do local.
Yep.
You do that search on maps, and you're going to get a diverse set of things because at the outset they don't know whether you mean fancy because you're taking a client out for breakfast versus quick versus what cuisine you want. They give you all the sorts and the filters and the tabs. They've got to disambiguate the query, and then you can also add in the layer of personalization and knowing about you, and you can imagine all this being way better with AI. But what it's not going to be is some kind of slop content that averages together all this stuff and doesn't try and either have a conversation with you, know something about you already, give you some options. It's got to do some of those things, I think.
I think it has to. And I think that's kind of like, I think we're very much in kind of wait and see mode, right? Like, I don't think anyone has figured out what this future thing looks like. And actually, that was kind of how I ended my blog post, which I think is like a very strong provocation right now. And this was triggered by going to this search event in New York a couple of weeks ago. It's so obvious to me that like nobody at Google knows. Nobody knows what the future of search looks like. Like no one can right now, right? Like everything's in flux, but it's like now is the time for prototypes. Now is the time for speculation. Like Google is listening. Like I 100% guarantee you that like if you have a compelling thesis for like I think search results should look like this, or I think like
just vibe code some stuff.
But for real, like you throw it over the fence. Like people inside, like I had a bunch of people from Mountain View looking at my blog post. Like of course, right? It's like it's I think they are hungry right now for ideas. And so if you want a voice, like prototype some stuff up. I think it's one of the best ways to kind of like, show, not tell. And like you said, with vibe coding, I mean, my whole blog post was basically just a system prompt that I wrote for Gemini. Like that was it. Like I just.
And actually, that was my favorite thing about the output, as I said, was the diversity of things. The fact that it was actually saying, you've said tomato soup, but like there's different things you might mean, and I don't know what you mean, and here's the options, and let me inspire you by and I love the idea of thinking of the, going back to putting our SEO hats on for a second, thinking of like the title and meta description as being actually sell you why you should click on this thing.
Right.
And we've seen in some of our experiments that in certain situations, removing the meta description is a winning move because it frees Google, forces Google, encourages Google to sell your link. And it can do that better than you can because you can only write a single meta description, but that page ranks for lots of queries.
Yep.
And Google can customize it and pull out the bit of the page that's most relevant, whatever. So thinking about it in that sense, I really liked that that idea of selling to you the idea, arguing, persuading you, convincing you that you should click on this link. From a technical standpoint, I love the fact that that system prompt actually worked. Like this is essentially a prototype. This is not just a Figma mock-up. Right. Like you can actually go and try this in Gemini.
Yeah.
And so I would definitely encourage people to do that. And I think, I mean, we can only speculate so much about it, but it's interesting to me that like Google is paying lip service to the idea that these things are all experiments, even when they rolled out, they roll it out in labs or beta or different things in different places. And they say AI overview is an experiment. And like, sure, I'm sure it is, but it doesn't feel like we're seeing the radical experimentation or the rapid experimentation that they could do at their pace and volume. Mm-hmm. It feels like they could put a lot more different prototypes out there and see how people are responding to it. And the bull case is the stuff they're doing is working really well. Like, it is quite possible, and we've seen hints at this, I think, in some of the public statements, that AI overviews increases query volume. Maybe even increases query volume to the extent that net clicks out increases, even though they're tiny little links. And it's very hard to tell this from the outside, because we're looking at through a microscope. Any individual site could be up or down, and we obviously hear from the people who've been most badly affected.
Yeah, I mean, I think the search event a couple of weeks ago in New York, Google point blank, they were asked multiple times, point blank refused to
give you any data.
They were like, we're not going to put it in Search Console. And they gave some reasons why, but like the obvious answer is like, no. The obvious answer is like, we don't want to, so we're not going to, right? Yeah. Like they gave a bunch of other kind of ideas, but like I think that's the essence of it. So we're flying blind, right? And I mean, like AI mode, for example, I think because it's kind of technically experimental right now, you can't even get the referrer. It doesn't even say it's Google when you click out from AI mode. So it just comes to as direct traffic. So we have like properly zero visibility of some of these surface areas. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. I think it's also interesting, like, as well as the kind of arms race that Google has with itself, this kind of like AI search versus regular search. It also has an arms race with like ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude and these other platforms, right? And I think it's kind of interesting, like, is that part of what, again, I'm biased because I made the prototype in the blog post, but like part of what I think is compelling about the prototype I put together is like, it actually leverages the bit that Google still has advantage over, right? I still think like having a proper, clean, page rank adjusted kind of crawl of the web, right? I'm using PageRank as a proxy for all of the things they do.
Yeah, and spam filtered. All the things that it's good at.
Yeah. And you see this like, you look on, for example, on Pinterest, right, where I've been spending a bunch of time recently. It's like they are covered in AI spam. Mm-hmm. And part of the problem they have is they don't have a kind of grounding in like which domain they should trust and which domain they should not trust. All they have is a kind of flat view of like, well, this pin got a bunch of engagement. Yep. Guess we should rank it high. And it's like, this is like Google from 2005, right? When Google was like, yeah, I guess this page has the keywords on it. I guess it should rank for the query. And I actually think, the helpful content updates of the last couple of years, and all the big kind of core algo updates that we've seen that have decimated a lot of the smaller publishers on the web, I now fairly strongly believe that almost all of that work was to prevent AI spam from covering the Google index, right? They basically took a bunch of like brand and authority dials and just went, these need to be higher. And
it's Vince all over again, right?
Yeah, but what's actually kind of astonishing is we haven't seen that much AI spam in Google. Right. Like now, Lily Ray has done a stand-up job of like pointing out where there is a bunch of low-quality content and results and all kind of like that definitely still happens. But like if you look at and especially for me, like I said, day to day, I look at Pinterest and how much Pinterest is just entirely overrun with AI content. And you look at Google and you're like, it's not overrun with AI content, right? Like here and there and a few examples, et cetera, et cetera. But they've mostly done a good job of keeping that stuff out of their index. And I think that this is, in my mind, kind of part of the essence of like some kind of defensible advantage that Google has, right? In the age of LLMs and AI search, actually maybe like having this kind of trusted index of the web is still a kind of a thing that can separate them from the ChatGPTs and the Perplexities and so on.
It was an interesting arms race all of its own, as in can they stay ahead of that?
Right.
It's also an interesting one from a kind of populist sense of like part of the problem is that human preferences aren't sufficient to do that. It turns out humans will click on any old crap. And and you're describing it with Pinterest. I think there's something probably similar in the Blue app, right? If old Facebook, I don't really log in there anymore. Right. But you read these articles that similarly overrun with AI slop, and it's not clear that users prefer not slop to slop. Or at least in their revealed preferences.
For sure.
And I think that's part
I mean, people love these AI generated images, right? I mean, like the new model came out from ChatGPT. They generated 700 million images in the last 2 days or something.
Melted their data center.
Entirely, right? People love this stuff. Like this stuff is very compelling. It allows you to dream and imagine in a way that we just have not been able to. Like humanity has never been able to do that in that way before. And so I think that, yes, a lot of this is kind of very compelling. And yet, you know, truthiness is still a concept that probably matters somewhere in the ecosystem for some kinds of queries. And like it is actually important to be able to send people to a website that, a raw baseline isn't malicious. But then actually further is like saying the right things and there for the right reasons and trusted and authoritative and all that kind of stuff,
So many more rabbit holes we could go down there, but let's flip for a second. And we've been talking there a lot about the search engines and the technology players and whether they call themselves search engines or not. Let's go back to the other side of the fence, to the marketers for a minute. So I mentioned SEOMBA earlier. It's on hiatus at the moment, but some great content and articles that you put out there around what should folks do when they're either in-house business owners or agency side. You covered lots of different angles of this kind of stuff. There's a lot of uncertainty around in the world, but I think I am placing the bet very strongly that search continues to be a thing.
Yep.
And that organic search traffic continues to be a thing, notwithstanding the conversation about 10 blue links versus 5 green links and whatever else. And I think one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is the quote that it matters less whether AI can do your job. What matters is whether your boss believes AI can do your job, in terms of job security.
Right.
And there's something somewhat similar from a marketer's perspective of it doesn't matter particularly what the future of search is so much as it matters what certain people, some level of seniority, believe the future of search is going to be. And there is definitely a kind of common sense narrative that ChatGPT is overtaking Google and all this kind of stuff, which it's objectively not true. There are some interesting trends, but it's not like it's a bad idea to be saying let's do well in Google right now.
Right.
I was kind of curious. That isn't really a question, but discussion topic. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are people coming to you talking about in terms of how you're thinking about budgeting, planning, pitching, strategy?
Yeah. How long have we got? I could talk about this for a long time. The essence of what you're poking at, I think, is an article that I wrote about input metrics for SEO.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote this a couple of years ago, and it remains, I think, one of the most kind of enduring, good ideas for SEO professionals that, again, when I speak to folks in the industry, they're not doing, right? And the essence of this is, in a world where search is increasingly volatile and unpredictable, you need to be able to anchor your entire strategy to measurable actions and outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So like, kind of the lagging indicator of like, hey, traffic went up, it is now even harder and harder to predict and manage and do, right? Like, and this is true both with the big algorithm updates that have happened in the last couple of years, AI search, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We continue to believe that search is going to be volatile, right? I believe you. So I think search is going to be a thing. I also think it's going to be increasingly volatile. And so in the face of that, like, you still need a way to be able to go to your boss and say, I want a couple $1 million to be able to do this project because I think it's going to drive success, right? And so if you think about that, kind of the essence of that equation, which is like, I want to ask for some resources, typically budget, right? Or headcount, whatever. I'm going to ask for some resources in order to do some stuff that will lead to some results, some business benefit,
good things,
right?
Yep.
And it's the middle part of that equation that I think is kind of the crux of the argument and the missing component from so much SEO thinking that I've seen, which is you want the budget to like do something, but like what is it you're going to do, right? And it isn't just quote unquote SEO, right? Or it can't be, rather. Like it shouldn't be your pitch, right? To be like, I'm going to wave my SEO wand.
More SEO.
I'll just do some black box SEO and good things will happen. You need to be able to anchor it to measurable actions, measurable behavior, right? And input metrics, which is this kind of like framework popularized by Amazon, really gets to the idea of like making those things that we control. So not things that Google controls, but things that we control. So for example, right, you're an e-commerce store and you look at all of your category pages and you realize a way that your category pages could be better, whether it's like adding content or improving whatever, X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
that's a project where you can say, actually, we have, X number of category pages. This is the amount of effort we need to put in per category page, right? Here's a calculation to be able to be like, here's the thing. Now, that pitch where you go, okay, well, I need $1 million to go write 500, description fields for my category pages so that I can get, whatever, 10% improvement. You can do that in a one-time fashion, right? You can go to your boss and you can be like, I want the budget to go write these titles and descriptions for these pages to get this benefit. But you can also do it in an ongoing fashion. I think this is really the heart and kind of secret of input metrics is every month's reporting is an opportunity to pitch your boss on more budget.
And do more of whatever the thing is that you.
But you have to anchor it to behavior, right? If all your monthly reporting is doing is talking about lagging indicators like page views and traffic and rankings,
number up, number down.
It's like number goes up, number goes down. Like okay, but like there's nothing inherently in this monthly reporting that allows me to see as an executive where I can put more money. However, if in your monthly reporting it's like 45% of our category pages are currently passing their SEO flag, then it's like very easy for an executive to come in and be like, well, how much would it cost me to make that 45% number 100%?
Yeah.
Right.
How long will it take?
And what's interesting about this whole idea is like, it's fairly simple, right? It's not like rocket science, and there's many ways that people have been doing this over the years. This idea goes all the way back to statistical process control and kind of managing like factory work and so on. Basically, like the idea of how do you know if what you're doing is working, right? But the essence of this is like there's a way to make your reporting a thing that advocates for your work, not just advocates for the channel. Right, and I think that's kind of a mindset shift that, again, I brought with me to Raptive. We've anchored kind of our entire internal kind of North Star around this set of input metrics and how we measure them and all that kind of stuff. And what's interesting is AI actually is a little bit of a piece of the puzzle here, because we now have the ability to extract features, like feature level extraction is a thing AI is very good at, right? And so previously, in classical kind of old school SEO, I'm talking way back now, really, all you really had was URLs and clicks, right? You didn't, maybe you had the title tag or something, but you couldn't really say, why is this page different than this page, right? It wasn't easy to do that. Now it's fairly trivial to be able to create some kind of classifier, right? Some kind of feature extraction and be able to be like, hey,
over 10,000 pages.
This page has a good description, this page has a bad description, this has X number of products and so on. And I think, this is really the foundation of how you navigate a volatile search feature, right? Because again, the right-hand side of the equation, right? Okay, I'm mixing up. We're probably going right to left in the image, whatever. The end of the equation, which is what we're going to get, right? The page views and the traffic and the revenue is increasingly going to be volatile, right? And so what you really need to anchor to is increasingly the measurable things that we can do. And then, plug for Search Pilot, right? I think where Search Pilot is kind of a critical piece of the infrastructure here for the right kind of company is you need a way to connect those inputs to revenue, right? So step one is okay, I'm going to anchor my SEO strategy to measurable things, measurable behaviors and inputs that we're doing. And that is a huge leap forward for most companies, right? Huge leap forward just to be able to say, these are the measurable things that this program will deliver that we believe will lead to success.
Yep.
Huge step forward. The step forward beyond that is then to be able to say, and by the way, we can prove that measurable progress on these metrics leads to
it's interesting, actually. We do it the other way around as well. So we actually quite often, one of the strategic bets that many of our customers are making is experimentation program as input metric. So, right, our bet is that we're going to run 25 tests a quarter, and running the test is the input metric.
Yep.
And because that is a thing you can do.
Yep.
And you can build the same argument the other way up. Essentially. And it's one of those really interesting things. I want to pull out a couple of things you said. The first thing, just to flag it to anybody who didn't notice, is you talked about a couple $1 million. And I want to just flag that up as something that too many folks I speak to around the industry are terrified of financial amounts above thousands.
Right.
And success costs money. The business initiatives cost money. Tiny businesses spend $100,000 on things.
Right.
Big businesses don't get out of bed for $100,000. And I thought again, no question there. I know we're kind of totally aligned on this, but I think one of the things that many more folks who work in SEO should get their head around is how to answer the question of, what would you do with another $1 million?
Yep.
And what would you do with another $10 million? And you don't have to be working at that large an organization for that to be a very, very sensible question. And if you're, and we certainly work with organizations that make billions of dollars in online revenue.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you need to be thinking, there's no way a six-figure investment on its own is going to show up.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's if you're, it's one of the most kind of concrete, tangible, I think, thought exercises that you can go through, which is like, imagine your boss comes to you and says, "What would you do with double the budget?" The answer can't be more, right? Like the answer cannot be, well, what we're doing is currently kind of working, so like we just do a bit more, right? Like, spoiler alert, you're not going to get double the budget for that. But like, can you anchor it to like the dollars would go to these activities and these activities and these things and these people and these behaviors that would lead to whatever increased revenue, right? Like, you need a tangible plan, right? But when you take a long, hard look at yourself, a lot of SEO programs today can't explain how the budget is being spent. They're like, you give us this money for people and resources and so on, and you get
often don't even do the basic math to add up what is that number, right? What is the headcount plus initiatives plus other teams that you're leaning on and so on.
This is one of my biggest kind of like this is one of my biggest rants that I had in the SEO MBA was everyone always talks up, like, holds up the paid search investment against the organic search investment, and it's like, okay, but like the organic search investment is like, you put your 2 SEO people or your SEO agency spend in your SEO investment. What about the entire product team that builds the front end of the website? Like, we're not being real people.
We're not being honest.
We are not being serious people here. Like,
these are not serious people.
These are not serious people. Like, it's no. There are many. There's more nuance to that debate, but like the essence is totally true, which is like a lot of and again, let me get more optimistic about this. The entire reason I founded the SEO MBA was because it's really hard to learn this stuff. Especially in an industry like SEO, which is essentially a discipline that lives in the cracks of other like functions, right? Like,
it's very self-taught and very
self-taught. People fall into it. Typically, at an organization, there's a very small SEO team, right? And so you have very few kind of peers and people to learn from. There's often nobody in the C-suite with SEO in a job title. So you have no kind of like role model, no connective tissue.
If you're lucky, somebody understands the paid channels.
You have nobody who can kind of like take you under their wing and be like, here's how it works. Here's how you can have my job someday, right? So there's like no kind of career path. There's no ability to get that kind of business thinking and business visibility into like how decisions are made, how budgeting works, how strategic planning works, et cetera, et cetera. And so because of that, there's a massive skills gap in the industry, which was the entire reason for the SEO MBA to exist, right? Which
incidentally, people have raved about, and like tons of people have had tons of value from, and I
appreciate
think,
it.
Yeah, it's I think you did a really good job of laying out what some of those skills are and how people can pick them up and how they can put them to work. I think one, you mentioned the discussion of paid search budgets. Two funny little anecdotes that I think you'd appreciate. One was this whole like, what if somebody came to you and offered you more money? What would you do? I was speaking to a major retailer recently who was literally having that conversation. The one we've always kind of slightly fantasized about. It's like, just give me a little bit of the paid search budget. Right. And they were literally talking about doing exactly that because the finance team, the quote was something like, the overspend on paid search last month was bigger than the entire annual SEO budget.
Right.
And so we're just thinking of experimenting with just a few percent of the paid search budget. The other conversation that's interesting was I'm speaking to some folks who manage these kind of scale of paid search accounts, which is not a world that I've ever, we used to run paid search accounts back in the day, but they were not, enterprise retailer paid search accounts. And at that scale, they actually face a lot of the same challenges that we're talking about here with SEO, right? That their whatever metric, CPA, ROAS, profitability, depends how far you model it. Those kind of numbers get impacted by stuff Google does, by algorithm updates, by what your competitors do, by seasonality, by you name it. And in much the same way that we have that challenge that you were describing of kind of you can do the stuff and there's a lot of volatility in the outcome, they have some of the same stuff, right? You can say, somebody was recounting the example of presenting at a QBR, quarterly business review, talking about the initiatives that they'd been running on the paid search side and how they'd improved this metric and run an experiment that was a winner here and reduced this cost per acquisition thing here and improved this conversion rate and got a better click-through rate here. And then, and the client kind of going, okay, but the numbers are worse than last quarter. And you're like, yes, like that can happen.
Right.
The macro economy can move you against. Like, there's so many things that can that can go wrong. And I think one of the great things about the SEO MBA is you're not actually inventing the wheel, obviously, right? You didn't come up with most of this stuff. You're applying things from other disciplines, other channels, other industries, other sectors, other parts of the business. And it's very easy for us to look at the kind of grass being greener in, they have 100 million to spend. It's like, sure, they do, but they actually have a lot of the same challenges and threats and difficulties. And we can learn from how they manage those.
For sure. My favorite one is like, it's like a meme in the SEO industry of like, it depends, right? Like, you know what's also a meme in other industries? It depends. Like you go talk to like product management conferences and they're like, how do we make a business case for like, it's like, it depends. Like they're all joking about the same stuff because these are like, they're not actually SEO problems, they're business problems, right? And I think what the fundamental tension that I think you face as you go from being more junior to more senior in your career is getting this visibility of like, how do businesses actually make decisions, right? And at various points in your career, depending on what industry you work in and what kind of business you're working for, you go through all kinds of like peaks and troughs of like, we make rational data-driven business decisions with all of the best data available to us, to the CEO told us to jump, so we're jumping, and back and forth in the middle of all of these kind of wild swings. And what you really realize is like most businesses in most situations are trying to make credible decisions with reasonable data to be able to move forward and do something. They're not trying to make the absolute best decision they can, right? Because most of the times making the absolute best decision they can is too slow, right? It's like,
I guess there's some kind of tautology or the oxymoron or something. It's like the best decision can't be the one that takes 6 months.
Exactly, right?
So like no longer the best decision.
Yeah, again, most of what you realize, I had this literally the other day in a meeting, was like, okay, we could go and get the perfect data to answer this question, but it'll take us 6 months. So like, okay, well, that's off the table. So then like, we got to do this with some other kind of data. What other kind of data do we have? And everyone's looking around like, well, I got a packet of potato chips over here, and I got like a spreadsheet I kind of like, rough house together over here. And like, what do we think is the right answer? And everyone's like, well, it's probably not the packet of potato chips. Like spreadsheet seems a little like maybe spend a couple days on the spreadsheet and make it a little better. And like, maybe that'll be like good enough for us to like move forward.
At least a little prettier.
Yeah. Well, also, like don't get me started on that. Yeah. But yeah, it's like we're not trying to do science here most of the time, right? And like even Search Pilot, right? Like again, like I'm sure you see this all the time.
We literally say the words all the time. We're doing business, not science.
Right.
And if you're trying to come up with a new drug to treat heart attacks, and you want to nail down those side effects or the efficacy to many decimal points with very, very high degrees of certainty, because you're about to go and give it to millions of people and their lives are at risk. We're trying to sell more stuff, and we're using our data to make the best, fastest decision of what seems most likely to work better and get ahead of the competition.
Yep.
And for the most part, you can roll back from the stuff that you don't like the look of. We should come to bring this to a little bit of a close. So, final thoughts. You, as we said, people get us confused and tag us in different conversations. So we've talked about your career arc going from, we worked together back in the day. You went to Google for a little bit. You were independent consultant and doing the SEO MBA thing. And you mentioned you're now at Raptive, where, for the first time in 15 years, 10 years, I guess, since you're at Google, you have, you're operating in that kind of framework of having a boss and that kind of senior leadership position as well. What have you learned since you've gone to Raptive that would feed back into the SEO MBA stuff? If you were starting the SEO MBA from scratch today, what have you learned over the last however long you've been there?
We're going to do that in the 5 minutes we have left. I think that if I'm being honest, I think that I anchored a lot of the SEO MBA to kind of strategic pitch moments, because that was most of what I did as a consultant. Right, I would come in and be like, I've got 3 months to like figure out a strategic plan and then deliver the plan to like either get new budget or whatever. And I think that being fully immersed in a kind of in-house role, what you realize is it's much more of an ongoing process than it is a moment in time process. Not a radical departure from any of the ideas, but I think I would anchor more to like, what are the behaviors and things you need to do day to day, week to week, that ladder up to the ability to make the pitch when the time is right, right? And I think that's kind of like it's much more opportunistic than planned, right? At least in my experience. Like even big companies that have annual planning cycles, like digital moves too fast, and so like you're always surprised, right? And so I think that I would anchor it more, and again, like input metrics and reporting is like definitely a component of this, but it's like, what are the things that you can be doing day to day, month to month, that kind of like increase executive confidence, give you more legibility into that kind of connective tissue between revenue, actions and outcomes. And, I think that kind of like operational side is maybe one that I had like not grappled with as much, right? Being a consultant, just kind of like swooping in every now and again, blogging in my own defense.
Well, and almost by definition, getting brought in when there was a moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And then that goes like all the way back to the distilled days as well. You mentioned, you kind of alluded to it there, but one of my favorite SEO MBA posts is I think it's called something like "Your boss cares more about reporting than you do."
Yep.
So I'd encourage folks to read that. I think that is one of the things that, so much of the SEO MBA that you've curated or taught or made legible from other areas. I would say that's one of the areas where like I'd say naturally good at, but like you have brought together your kind of aesthetic sense with your numbers mindset. And I think just intuitively do that stuff really well. And I think what's worked really well in that post in particular, but it kind of flows through the SEO MBA, is showing how the sausage is made. Like,
right.
Literally down to that level of, because you've got the other one of like removing legends from, the kind of tufty type stuff of, okay, literally go click this button and it'll make your, because reports get better both strategically and, I was joking before, but like, because you made them look better. And
100%.
So there's a lot of that going on.
One thing that I wouldn't change about the SEO MBA is that like religious focus on communication, like clarity of communication. This is something I think I've seen like even more so, like being in-house in a kind of leadership role, with like things are slinging around all day long. Like I got stuff coming to me from people that were on my team. I got to pass things up to people that I report to, and vice versa. Things are going on. Like any slight misstep, like basically causes a turnover. Like you think about like a basketball game, like it's like the ball's flying around, you're running up and down the court.
I wish we had those stats. We need advanced stats. Like,
totally, but it's like this one document we made that just doesn't like has a rambling intro that gets passed over, and then somebody else comes back and is like, I don't get it. And then like now you're in a meeting trying to just like explain the thing because somebody felt like you didn't know what you were doing, and it's kind of all cascading from like somebody hadn't just nailed the clarity component or like the communication component. It's like that is happening all day long. And so like the clarity of communication, the presentation of your ideas and what you want to say and how you want to say it, just fiercely important.
Yeah, and really powerful to people's careers, I think, as well.
Totally.
As a single metric for your own career, look at how often you can give your boss stuff that they can just literally use, rather than kind of have to put their own stamp on and whatever.
Totally. I mean, that is almost like that's almost the gold standard, is like the number of times you send something to your boss that they literally just forward on.
Yeah.
Is like you like good job.
I teach it very tactically in line manager training as well, of teaching people to make requests that can be answered with a single yes. Right.
Right.
Don't make them ask for more information. Don't make them, kind of pick from options or whatever. Say like, I want to do this one. Here's all the information you need. And the number of times you can just get the kind of thumbs up emoji is a really good metric. As I say, we should wrap. This has been fun. We'll catch up about the kids when we're not streaming to the world. But if people want to follow along with what you're up to these days, and next time you put out a Google is grounded thing, where should people follow you at the moment?
TomCritchlow.com is still kind of the hub for everything. I've got an email newsletter there as well. I'm more active on probably Blue Sky than Twitter these days, and also LinkedIn, probably the best kind of trifecta social platforms. I don't know. Or follow me everywhere. I don't know.
Whatever people's preferences are.
I'm all over.
Easy to find.
You'll find me. But yeah.
Or possibly
thanks,
me.
Will.
And so,
having me on.
tag either of us, and the other one will respond to the bat signal.
If you have any questions, ask Will. That's
Yeah. All right.
Great.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks.
See you soon. Good.